Welcome back to Fearless Ferris Fire. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to clean a 1999 Yamaha 350 ATV carburetor. So in times past, or when I first got this quad, I needed to clean the carburetor on it, and I couldn't find any videos on YouTube of cleaning this specific carburetor, or the 99 Yamaha Big Bear carburetor. So I'm going to add that video to YouTube so that if you have one of these quads, that you'll be able to clean your carburetor with confidence. Tools you're really going to need, it's not much. Phillips screwdriver, and to basically pull off your ATV, you're going to need a flathead. And I believe on the stock Yamaha, you're going to need a metric, not Torx, but a hex headed, like a L key. Like one of these you're going to need to basically pull it off of the intake manifold or the intake runner on that ATV. So, yeah, large flathead, one of the L keys, and a number 2 Phillips. So once you have to pull off the quad, there's going to be a little brass thing that sits right in that hole right there that has the cable in it. So you want to pull this all the way up until you have it, and get the cable so that it is basically parallel to the hole coming out, and then you'll be able to just pull the brass and the cable out. Pull the brass thing off, and you'll just be able to pull the wire out. And then make sure you keep that brass piece, because without that little brass piece, you'll be screwed to be able to put it back together. So now, once you have your carburetor kind of in this state where it is pulled out of the machine, first thing you want to do is make sure that you have all the fuel out. See, there's a little bit left, but you basically want to get the majority of the fuel out of the quad. I mean, not out of the quad, out of the carburetor. And most likely your problem, if you're not getting fuel, is going to be down here in your float. But in this video, I'll just show you to clean everything. So first things that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to get some towelettes, or just some shop towels, just to make sure that we can wipe everything down as we're going. So you should also have carburetor cleaner. I don't have carburetor cleaner on hand, so I'm just going to use some electronic cleaner. You can also use brake fluid cleaner, or brake clean. So first thing you're going to want to do is kind of wipe down your carburetor. And there's also the dip tanks that you can stick in a basket and dip it down in there. You can also use solvent, just any good hard cleaning fluid will be good. And you should be wearing gloves when you're using those hard cleaners. So you're going to just want to get everything nice and cleaned out. So your intake, your going into the engine side, just kind of get most of that loose dirt off, that when you have this thing all pulled apart, that could possibly fall into the more sensitive components of the carburetor as you're pulling it apart and cleaning. And make sure you have a good clean work surface. I'm doing this on my father's table saw, which has a nice steel top that I'm not going to be using any corrosives, so it won't hurt it. And all the gasoline and cleaning fluids will actually clean every contaminant off of it, so technically it'd be helping. But if you're using something corrosive, don't. So now that you have that kind of cleaned up, you want to take your number 2 Phillips, and you want to pull the float off. Before you start pulling this thing apart, make sure you have like not super expensive, but you want somewhat quality screwdrivers, not the cheapest screwdrivers you can get, because if you're using the really cheap ones and your carburetor has not been pulled out apart before, or you have some with an iron fist before you tightening everything, you will be stripping out all of these little screw heads. So make sure you have a quality screwdriver. I mean, it doesn't have to be a snap-on, but you just want a higher quality than just some dollar store screwdriver. Because when you're using the cheaper screwdrivers, they do not fit as well and will put you at a higher risk of stripping these out, which will make your day a whole lot worse. Most of the time, you can get away with finding some other carburetor and pulling the screws off if you do strip it out, but that's not always the case. So now I'm just kind of getting some of the fuel off, and make sure to just be kind of wiping everything up. You don't want a bunch of fuel on the ground, because that just puts you at a higher risk of getting it's fire hazard in a way. So now you have your carburetor pulled apart. Just look at it for visual inspection. Look at your bowl. If you have a bunch of shellac, which will look yellow or black in bad cases, you're going to want to clean your bowl out good. Maybe get a little brush. But before you start using any cleaning fluids, you want to remove your gasket. Because once you screw up this gasket, you're going to have to get a whole rebuild kit to be able to replace that gasket. Because like the Paramatacs and the gasket makers technically are not supposed to be used around gasoline. So now if you're still having like throttle issues, what you can do is make sure that your float is good and working, because if it's stuck, that could have you a problem, and it's either not letting fuel in, or it's flooding your bowl and allowing too much fuel to go in, which will also screw you up. If everything's moving smoothly, you feel no resistance when you're bobbing your float up and down, then you can go, and you will need also a flathead. Like this is a 1/4 inch flathead to pull your jets. So you will have 2 jets on the quad. You will have your main throttle jet, or like your high throttle jet, which will be running the engine when you're basically past more than a 1/16 or an 1/8 of a throttle, pushing the lever on the throttle. So if your quad's able to run, but does not like any more throttle, then this might be your issue, that this is clogged or that your float is not working. And I've dealt with that before. And then you'll have your really, really small jet, which is down under, and I have to grab a different screwdriver to be able to pull that apart, because it is really small and is deep down in there. I suggest you getting these cabinet screwdrivers, they're called. So basically, a cabinet screwdriver is, you have your regular flathead. So see how you have your shaft and then it flares out and then back down to a point? So that flare will mess you up. A cabinet screwdriver is ground down even so that it doesn't flare out anywhere. So it's the same size as the shaft going in. So then your large jet is this, the big one that the top sticks out, so you basically can see where you put the flathead. And then you have this brass runner, which is just like a pressure relief. And then you'll have like a breather, and then you'll have your idle jet, which is the nice small one down here. So then once you get it pulled out, you can just dump it out. So that's your idle jet. Really, it's a really small jet, but what you can do to tell if it is clogged up is look at it with a light, and you can kind of twist it around, and if you see light through it, then you know it's clear, because anything clogging it will completely clog, because these are so small. And I am looking up at it, and I can see that it is not plugged, and that is essentially the same for your not your idle, for your running jet. You can just put it up to a light. If you see maybe something on the side, because this is a larger jet, it's going to be letting more fuel, you can first try kind of blowing through it. If that's not working, what I suggest is if you have a welder, you can use these tip cleaners from a welder. And you don't want to get this biggest size that'll fit in there, but you just grab one, and you can just kind of push it in there and lightly go around there. And they'll go, and it'll just clean anything that's in there. And yeah, get it out so that you're not clogging your jet and you're having max flow that you need to run your quad. So once those are pulled out and clean, you can either put those back in if you think that's all the problem is. And if not, then you want to leave them out for the next steps. Now, I like these tips where you can get a little punch. And what you'll want to do is on your carburetor, you'll have these 2 points, and then where your float meets, and you want to use that pin, and you'll push another pin out of these 2 little tongues to pull off your float. Now, here you have your float. Some of the older ones will be made out of a material that can actually absorb gasoline. So that might be a problem if you have a machine that does not have a rebuilt carburetor on it, that it might have absorbed some gasoline, so it should feel quite light to you, to the touch. And then also another problem that you might find on an older machine is that this rubber here at the tip of your float control might be worn out, and so it is not working properly, so it's not sealing the hole that the gasoline is flowing into. If that's the problem, you'll want to get a rebuild kit and replace that. If not the problem, then you are set. You go to the next step. Now you'll just want to look in that hole that you pulled basically the float and everything out of. If everything's good there, then you are set to go. Now on to this next step. Now you're going to want to come up to the top of your carburetor. You want to pull your number 2, and you're going to pull this top off. It is plastic on these carburetors. And this is your needle and throttle control diaphragm up here. So try to keep some of your screws organized, but most of them on this carburetor luckily are all the same size and same length. So if you say put one from the top on the bottom, it's really not going to matter because they're all split washer, lock washers with like little 1/2-inch screws. So and it's okay to take your time so you don't screw anything up. And you can also kind of place everything out so you know where it is. Now up here on the diaphragm, don't be surprised if you find some dirt on the top of the diaphragm. That is quite common to happen. And as you can see, diaphragm should be dry. If you have fuel up here, then that is a new problem. So you want to replace your diaphragm. Luckily, mine is fine. There is some silt on the top, but that is to be expected because this is not a wet gasket. You want to pull out your spring, and this spring sits right here on this nub when it goes back together. And you'll pull the entire assembly apart. So this is your throttle slide with your needle. So you want to drop your needle out. And you'll want to keep this little plastic piece and these plastic pieces together. Now you can take a rag and clean your needle. If the tip seems messed up or if it's too scratched, you may want to replace it because that could be your problem of why you're having to clean your carburetor. If not, then set it aside and look at your slide. Now if your slide is dirty, you can clean it up. It may be dirty just from running in like a dusty environment, but you want to clean it up. So I got mine cleaned up pretty nicely here. And you'll want to look here now. You want to keep track, so there's your diaphragm, and then you have a little gasket up top here. So you want to keep all these things together so you're not losing anything. And now look in the top of your carburetor and just clean everything out. Just kind of get in there with your rag and just clean it up. And if you have your cleaning fluid, this is a good time to, because you can check here and you can see that you have no gaskets, except if you are going to use cleaning fluid, you want to get every gasket off because it will destroy those gaskets, and you'll have to get a rebuild kit to replace that stuff. So I'm pulling off my choke control, which may be a problem with you, so you can look at this part. And this screw is wanting to strip out. There also may be gum that can get around this choke flap here. But you just pull it off. There is some gunk in here, as you can see. You look on this red, you can see that line down there at the bottom. That is some crud in there, so just clean everything up. Now that you have that, this is your choke control, which mine's actually pretty crusty. This is the crustiest part that I've seen on this carburetor, and you want to pull that out. So now you have every part of your carburetor pulled apart. Almost every part of your carburetor that you can pull apart, except for your choke, which you'll need a tiny little wrench to be able to pull apart that. Or you can have some pliers or a small crescent wrench. But it'll need to be really nice and small to be able to fit in there. I'm going to be taking, I believe it is a 10 millimeter. Might be a 12. It is a 12 millimeter bolster style nut. Or what you can do is you can just pull off this nub on the end with a little bit of force, and then be able to slip a box end over your nut here. Or a extra long, deep socket, which I do not have currently on hand here. So I'm going to leave this part alone, but you know how to pull it apart. It's fairly simple to put back together. So now on the inside here, it's a little dirty, but I have all my gaskets pulled off. So I'm going to take my cleaning fluid and just spray this thing down and just get it nice and clean. And I'm going to grab some compressed air to blow it down a bit as well. Letting it dry a little bit, and I'll find the cleaning nozzle. So come back for part 2 of cleaning the carburetor to basically finish it up. So see you in the next video of cleaning the carburetor.